Today we are working on lesson 62, complex roots of quadratic equations. Now that title has a lot of vocabulary in it, so let's make sure we understand what this means we will be doing. Whenever we are asked to find the roots of something, roots of an equation, so equals something, not just x squared plus 2x minus 15, that means find the solutions. And we could complete the square, we could factor, we could use the quadratic formula. This one is easy to do with factoring. It would be x plus 5, x minus 3 equals 0. So find the roots means we need to say x could be negative 5, x could be positive 3. Next, quadratic equations means our biggest exponent on the variable is 2. So we've got, like we had in that first example, x squared plus 2x minus 15 equals 0. We might have 7x squared minus 3.2x plus 12 equals 0. Anything with the biggest exponent being a 2. And then when we talk about complex roots, that means a plus bi. So we're talking about having something imaginary in our solution. X equals, and it's going to have something with an I in it if it is complex. That means we have the square root of a negative in there when we were completing the square, for example. So let's move on now to a couple of examples of how this might work. Solve by completing the square. All right, we know how to do that. This is nice. It starts off with 1x squared. That's what we want. So we're going to move the 14 over to the other side, and we have the x's together on one side, x squared plus 6x equals negative 14. Then we know that we need to end up with a short parentheses squared that equals something on the right-hand side. We know that our method means we're going to have to add the same thing to both sides. And we know that our parentheses starts with 1x. We take half of whatever's in front of the x. In this case, it's a plus 6. Half of that is a plus 3. And then we take that plus 3 and square it, and that is what we add to both sides. So we now have x plus 3 squared equals, and negative 14 plus 9 is a negative 5. And now we do our plus or minus square root method. So square root on the parentheses squared gives us just x plus 3. Square root undoes the square. On the right-hand side, we do the square root around the whole thing, so the square root of the negative 5, and we do a plus or minus. But we know that because of that negative, we've got, there's our plus or minus. Square root of anything negative means square root, and then times the positive, and then times an I. So if this is x plus 3, when I subtract 3 on both sides, I have x is negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 5 times I. Since one part is rational, the negative 3, and the other is irrational, the square root of 5, we can just leave it like that. We can write it just as one combined form. Also, one is real, one is imaginary. We can't combine those. If you prefer, you could write that out as x plus root 5 times I is one answer, minus 3 minus root 5 times I is the other answer. I will accept it written either way. So let's do another example. Okay, minus x plus 5x squared equals negative 3. This is good. It's got the x's on one side already, but it's not in the right order. And when I do get it in the right order, I'm going to have a 5x squared, and I know that I want to have a 1x squared. So I am going to need to divide everything by the plus 5, since there's a plus 5 in front of my x squared. And then putting that in the right order, I have a 5x squared divided by 5 is just 1x squared like I want. And then I have minus x over 5, that's minus 1/5 times x. I like to write it with the fraction times the x, makes it a little bit easier for me to see what I'm going to need to take half of in the next step. And then that equals negative 3/5 over here on the right. Okay, I'm going to complete the square, so I am going to have my parentheses that starts with 1x and gets squared. I am going to take half of this negative 1/5. So half of negative 1/5 is minus 1/10. Then I am going to take that minus 1/10 and square it, which gives me plus 1 over 100, and I need to add that on both sides. So my left side is x minus 1/10 squared. My right-hand side, I need a common denominator before I can add those. So I'm going to multiply numerator and denominator by 20. So now on the right-hand side, I have negative 60/100 plus 1/100, which is negative 59 over 100. Next, I need to take my plus or minus square root of both sides. So I take the square root on the left, square root undoes the square, and I have x minus 1/10 equals. On the right, I'm going to do plus or minus the square root. That means I'm going to have plus or minus the square root of 59 over 100 times I. So the minus sign is going to mean I've got an I, and I've got the square root of the positive, and that's going to be square root of the numerator over square root of the denominator. So I have plus or minus square root of 59 over 10, and the I goes out there separately. It's not part of the numerator. We're going to put it after that number. All I really had to do there was square root of 100 is 10. Final step, I am going to add that 1/10 to both sides, so that my final answer is x is positive 1/10 plus or minus root 59 over 10 times I. And again, we do not combine those with a single denominator because one is real and one is imaginary. They always have to be a plus bi. And that finishes up our lesson.